The Misadventures of an Escape Artist, Episode 16. Breaking 3 lumbar vertebrae. I was 33 years old when I completed my first year at university. At the beginning of the summer, I broke 3 lumbar vertebrae again. I was on my father's boat, a cruise on Lake Landreville. After some time on the lake, my father and I saw a cigarette boat in trouble, driven by a young boy. The boat was rapidly filling with water, and it would quickly end up at the bottom of the lake if the water was not bailed out. The boat was quickly flooding from the rear. I jumped from my father's boat onto the front of the speedboat, providing a counterweight so that the young man could apply the throttle and accelerate. As the boat gained speed, he would be able to force the water out of the boat from the rear. That day the waves were very high, not a good day for a ride in a small boat. As the craft gained speed, it drained the water and was also beginning to slap up and down in the waves. I was standing at the front of the boat and found it difficult to keep my balance. The boat was finally empty of water and could now slow down and return to port. I shouted to the young man to slow down, cut the throttle and stop the boat. I yelled that I was having trouble keeping my balance. But he continued to speed through the waves. The front of the boat slapped down between 2 waves and then quickly emerged at the top of the next wave. I was launched into the air, and as the boats plunged into the new wave, I was slammed down and hit the bow of the boat, landing hard in a sitting position. I immediately felt intense pain in my lower back and found myself lying on the long nose of the boat as the young man finally cut the engines. As I'd already injured my back 13 years earlier, I clearly knew that my situation was serious. I asked the young driver to take me to shore. My father, who was following in his own boat, called for an ambulance. When the paramedics arrived, I was put on a stretcher. I was asked to be taken to Sherbrooke University Hospital. It was the same facility that had treated me 18 years before when I had broken my cervical vertebrae, the C1, C2 and C3. When I arrived at the hospital, the fracture of my lumbar vertebrae, L2, L3 and L4, was confirmed. After being discharged from the hospital a week later, I was fitted with a corset that started at the top of my hips to underneath my arms. The doctor told me that I would have to exercise for at least 6 months to regain a small part of my strength. Walking and running again without problem was not guaranteed. When I left the hospital, I went to stay with my mother so that I could regain my strength. Luckily for me, my mother had rented a condo on the shores of Lake Landreville. The condo is equipped with a long outdoor pool. I immediately decided to go to the pool every day in my corset to work full-time to regain strength. I hope to return to my pre-accident life. For the next few days at the pool, I could barely move my hands, arms and feet. It would take me about 15 minutes to swim to the other end. A month later, I was able to swim laps faster and without my corset. But once out of the water, I put the blasted thing back on. In September, I returned to university and started my 3rd semester in political science. I love to study the world through the eyes of intellectuals from Europe and North America. The courses at the University of Montreal offered points of view from yesterday's and today's world. Despite many hours of study and courses, I always kept an eye on the aviation world. But I had not informed Transport Canada of the accident that summer. I did not want to risk losing my aviation medical license. In early November, I was offered a job as a pilot on an Aero Commander, a small twin-piston engine for 1 or 2 pilots and 4 to 6 passengers. The job consisted of flying survey flights in Central America. I did my training on the airplane and took an IFR flight test the next day with a Transport Canada inspector. A few days later, the director of the survey company informed me that the contract was cancelled. I was happy I had not stopped my university studies. The Magdalen Islands, Air Madeline. A few weeks later, I was offered a job with Air Madeline as a captain on an Embraer 110, a twin-engine turbine aircraft for 19 passengers and 2 pilots. I'd already flown this plane as a co-pilot at Air Alma. The job at Air Madeline was based in the Magdalen Islands, a magnificent group of islands near the mouth of the St. Lawrence River, 100 nautical miles southeast from the town of Gaspé. It was for a company that was starting a regular service between Magdalen Islands and the two cities of Gaspé and Rimouski on the St. Lawrence River in Quebec. The islands were beautiful and the job sounded fabulous. I was excited to accept the position, even though I would need to stop my studies for a while. The time I spent at Air Madeleine was one of my pleasurable experiences in aviation. I worked from the end of December 1993, when the company was formed, until it closed its doors at the end of August 1994. Air Madeleine had a daily morning and evening flight between the three cities. There were 2 captains and 2 co-pilots. We were all based in a large 4-bedroom house paid for by the company and beautifully located facing large cliffs and the ocean. The cliffs were formed by red sandstone, a sedimentary rock composed of quartz and iron oxide. The wind, waves, tides, and ice caused the erosion of the extremely brittle walls, sculpting them into sometimes surprising but spectacular shapes. After a few weeks of work, we understood that it was not necessary for the 2 crews to be on the site at the same time. We decided at the end of January that one crew would fly for 1 week and then be replaced by the other crew. I ended up living 1 week in Madeleine Island and 1 week in my Montreal apartment. The competition was fierce between the different airlines in those days. There were 4 air companies flying to the islands. 7 miles from Main Island was Entry Island, which had an all-English-speaking fisherman population from Irish and Scottish origins. The populace had been dwindling, from the 260 people living on the island to only about 60 today. As there was no airport on the island, a boat was the way to travel there, even though you could fly a small aircraft to its landing strip. It was so much fun for my co-pilot Jean and I when we found ourselves without passengers on a return flight. We would watch the whales in the fjord or see the seals on the ice floes in the spring. We often flew to Brion Island, which had been closed to visitors since 1983, to see the birds. 27 kilometers away was the tiny Roche des Oiseaux, Bird Rock. During our flights to these treasured island bird sanctuaries, we flew at a good distance away and used the minimum power of our engines so as not to make too much noise and frighten the birds. Occasionally we made cargo flights to Charlottetown, the capital of Prince Edward Island. On the return trip to the Madeleine Islands, we would bring back refrigerators, clothes washers, ovens, or other equipment that could not be found on the archipelago. Since there was no fast food restaurant on Madeleine Island, the airport employees always asked me to bring back 25 Big Macs when we returned from Charlottetown. As for me, I always enjoyed the crabs, scallops, mussels, and lobsters that were available fresh all year round. These were the pleasures of living with fishermen.